At issue this Sunday, one last push for votes. The candidates and their surrogates make their final campaign stops, including one in the swing state of New Hampshire. Plus, a shock poll from a state not considered by most to be a toss-up.
Our elected leaders in Congress are divided. But what about regular, everyday Americans? Market research expert Diane Hessen says, no, we're not divided. And she's got the receipts to prove it. Diane joins us.
I don't really laugh like that, do I? A little bit.
And live from New York, it's the vice president. We'll show you how Kamala Harris did during her appearance on Saturday Night Live. A live edition of At Issue starts now. Good morning and welcome to At Issue. We are live on this Sunday morning before Election Day. Thanks for joining us. I'm Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. Usually at this stage of the campaign, there's not a lot that can surprise us, but a poll out yesterday in Iowa managed to do that.
Yeah, check this out. The Des Moines Register Mediacom Iowa poll shows Vice President Kamala Harris leading former President Trump by 3 points. Robert F. Kennedy comes in at 3%, with Libertarian presidential candidate Chase Oliver getting 1% of support. 3% of people aren't sure, or at least they told the pollsters they weren't. 2% wouldn't tell them anything. Here's why that's stunning. Almost no one had Iowa as a battleground state this cycle, and that could go either way.
So could this poll be an outlier? Sure, of course it could. Most polls in Iowa have Trump ahead comfortably. But the pollster, Seltzer and Company, has a history of bucking the conventional wisdom and being correct in Iowa.
Case in point, the Iowa polls Seltzer and Company released on the final weekend of the campaign in 2016 and 2020 mirrored the state's results in those elections. Let's go ahead and bring in our political reporter, Matt Pritchard. Matt, Seltzer's poll indicates that women, particularly those who are older or who are politically independent, are driving the late shift towards Harris. What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, Corey, Sue, put simply, polls are a flawed science that's ever changing and often a snapshot of that specific moment in time. So this poll takes on the weight that you want to put on it with whichever factor you're looking at. In fact, the Trump campaign responded to this poll by countering with a different survey out of Emerson, writing, the Des Moines Register is a clear outlier poll Emerson College released today far more closely reflects a state of the actual Iowa electorate and does so with far more transparency in their methodology. Now, what this does do is make Iowa a state that we are going to be watching very closely come Tuesday night. Corey?
Where are the candidates today, and any chance that someone like Vice President Tim Walz or former President Clinton swings through Iowa as a last-minute stop?
Yeah, I mean, never say never, but in terms of where they are actually going right now, Vice President Harris will hold 3 different campaign stops in Michigan. This morning, she's expected to address a black church service in Detroit. Former President Donald Trump to hold rallies in 3 different battleground states, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. Meantime, J.D. Vance will appear in New Hampshire. Now, the Republican vice presidential candidate will appear with Donald Trump Jr. in Derry, New Hampshire, at the New England Sports Center. This was a bit of a surprise because when I was up in New Hampshire on Friday covering Bill Clinton's Granite State stop for the Harris campaign, I asked New Hampshire Republican Party Chair Chris Ager if a Trump surrogate visit would be helpful. Here's what he told me.
This campaign is not about all the Washington insiders and swamp creatures. It's about who's better for New Hampshire.
Wouldn't it help, though, to have a bigger name maybe coming from the Trump campaign if Donald Trump was here or one of his family members, one of his surrogates?
We've actually talked to the campaign, and we've said our people are already highly motivated. They don't need external celebrities to get them motivated.
So who knows what changed between then and now, but all to say the Trump campaign is making its way to the Granite State in the final days of its bid for the White House.
That question changed it. That's
it. Matt, this presidential campaign, let's go back to the beginning. It started as the rematch that no one wanted, President Biden versus former President Trump, right? But since late June, there have been so many twists and turns. Who knows what's next? Do you know what's next?
I don't. I wish I did. But of course, everyone is watching to see if any other surprises are coming down the pike. In terms of what we've seen, though, let's go over it. I mean, this election season hasn't been for the faint of heart. Going through some of the biggest moments and surprises that took place over the last 4 months. That's it. 4 months, starting with President Biden dropping out of the race. The 46th president's age had been a focal point of critics and supporters throughout the early part of 2024. But after successfully navigating key state primaries, the seas seemed to have settled and Biden would carry the ticket through to November. That is, until he took to the debate stage.
dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
That disastrous performance set off a domino effect, with high-ranking Democrats calling on the president to step aside, which President Biden resisted for weeks before sending out a statement via tweet announcing that he would not seek re-election and instead support Vice President Harris, laying out his reasons to the nation in an Oval Office address. And while it's hard to imagine anything more significant during a presidential election cycle, Biden's decision followed an arguably more significant and considerably more frightening moment. The attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania, sending shockwaves throughout the country, with the former president falling to the floor, bleeding from his ear, only to stand back up and throw his fist in the air, telling his supporters to fight, fight, fight. He would emerge just days later wearing a bandage at the Republican National Convention. Now, that wild summer would give way to a more tried and true campaign approach. Battleground states in focus, VP picks announced, and debates held, with Donald Trump chalking up a bizarre moment in his back and forth with Kamala Harris, shouting at one point that migrants in Ohio were, quote, eating the dogs of residents, a point that was fact-checked in real time and proven to be false. Now, odd and defining statements continued into the waning days of the campaign. Just recently, a comedian at Madison Square Garden at a Trump rally there called Puerto Rico a, quote, floating island of garbage. Comments the Harris campaign were quick to pounce on, but were met with their own adversity after President Biden said in an interview that the only garbage he sees are supporters of the former president. All to say, it has been a contentious, brutal, and at times bizarre election cycle with just 2 days left to go. Guys?
All right, our Matt Pritchard. 2 days. Why don't we just go 2 more months?
Why not?
Everybody's having fun, right? Joining us this morning in studio to talk about the presidential race are Jeff Deal, Republican former candidate for governor and Senate in Massachusetts, and Jaquetta Van Zant, host of the Politics and Prosecco podcast. Who else could we have on with just 48 hours?
There you go.
Where do you feel this race is at with just 2 days to go, Jeff, and then Jaquetta?
Sure, I feel pretty comfortable. In 2015-16, I was the only Republican in office on Beacon Hill to actually support Donald Trump. I had the same read on the electorate, I think, then as I do now. Didn't feel as comfortable in 2020. Not to say I'm Nostradamus. All I'm saying is my feel on the Republican side is we're looking good going in, and the polls seem to back that up. I know this Iowa outlier. I think it is an outlier, but I do think that right now it's Trump's to win, but that anything can happen. I mean, this cycle has been, as I think you guys have pointed out with everything here, just one of the craziest I think we've seen in a long time.
Jax, where are you at today, and compare it to where you were when you learned that Kamala Harris was going to be the nominee?
Yeah, I know. I was a little weird on that past one. I'm ready for this election one to be over, but I'm actually looking past November 5th. I'm looking to November 6th, where I feel like when Donald Trump loses on Tuesday, it's going to kill the Republican Party. And the unfortunate part about that is there are still moderates. This party has allowed this man to paint them all as racist and bigots, and they've been okay with that. And so for me, it's looking past November 5th and really taking stock of, who are these people and why do we want them leading in places that is governing our country and our democracy.
Jeff, we had Representative to Congress Ayanna Pressley on a couple of weeks ago. She is a progressive Democrat. She's a member of the squad. I asked her if she ever thought she would wake up one morning and be supporting the same person for president that the Cheney family was. There's a wide variety of American beliefs.
That's what I'm talking about.
But how...
Tulsi Gabbard switching parties?
Tulsi Gabbard is not Dick Cheney and the Cheney family.
She was a legitimate nominee for Democrats just a cycle ago.
How do you feel when you look at this wide variety of people that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have assembled who say they're voting for her, when Donald Trump seems to keep just losing parts of the Republican Party?
You did see what Liz Cheney lost in her re-election bid, right? I think it was a triple double digit. It was pretty bad for her. She doesn't represent the Republican Party. So for her to be with Kamala, not a huge surprise.
What about all the former representatives of the administrations, of the Bush administration, people who work for Mitt Romney? There's all the people who were in charge of keeping our country safe who are Republicans who are for Kamala Harris.
Well, this is why I think you've seen a transformation in the Republican Party because of Trump. The Bush, Romney people, the establishment on the Republican side, the ones that I fought on Beacon Hill, those are the people that are now on the outs. And I think they're a little bit hurt, butthurt, I don't know whatever term you want to use. And that's why they're supporting anybody against Donald Trump.
They're not on the outs. They're about this country, which you seem to be and Donald Trump seem to be not about this country. This is a country of inclusivity and making sure people feel safe and welcoming. And if you're going to sit here and support a man who allowed some comedian to get on the TV last week and call an entire nation of people who are Americans garbage, then that says a lot more about you than it ever does about Liz Cheney or anybody else who's decided that country first is the message.
Well, I mean, look, garbage, deplorables, Republicans have certainly been called all that now by the Democrats. I think that when you insult half the electorate, or maybe in this case, I think after Tuesday, more than half the electorate, you're going to pay the price politically. So
to that point, we talk about different voting groups that each side needs to get over the line. We see Kamala Harris pulling independents, pulling Republicans who are disenchanted with MAGA. We see Donald Trump really leaning hard into getting white young males, non-college educated and college educated. Do you think the pivot sort of by both campaigns have done enough to expand their base? Because Trump seems to have this ceiling of 47, 48. And it appears that Kamala Harris is getting young women, getting independents, getting older folks. And that was what was crazy about the Iowa polls. You saw older women breaking sort of 2-to-1 towards her. Has he done enough to expand his base, and has she done enough to expand hers? We'll start with you, Jax.
I think she has. As you all know, I was against her doing more media when she first got into the race. But I think the pivot that the campaign did by getting her in front of people has brought more people who were like a little bit shaky back into the fold.
What do you think? He seems to not just be able to crack that ceiling of 47, 48.
I don't know. I mean, the fact that you had the Teamsters Union president at the Republican convention.
Getting booed by the crowd.
Well, okay. But then you had the Philadelphia firefighters endorse Donald Trump. I think Trump has the rank and file support right now of a lot of union members that really is one of these hidden things that's helping push his numbers.
Jeff, are you worried that if Donald Trump loses on Tuesday, he's going to go out and say he won, and Elon Musk is going to amplify that, and then Putin's going to launch the bots? I mean, are you willing, if Donald Trump loses on Tuesday, are you willing to come out and say, that's it, he's lost, let's move on?
No, we as a country have got to solidify, come together. I absolutely 100% think that whatever the results are, and again, I know some states are saying they're going to take a few days or so to count. I think it's worth, obviously, making sure that these the voting is as accurate as possible, because we have got to have a country that's no longer divided. There are too many foreign actors right now trying to disrupt what's going on in America and internationally, a lot of disruption right now. We need solidify America and then help other countries.
Are either of you worried about any sort of political violence taking place? Because we know that the feds are on high alert over the next, month and a half?
Yep.
But we're not the ones calling for bloodshed if our candidate loses. So I'm not worried about that. And let me tell you something.
Well, our candidate was shot at and actually hit, so let's put it that way.
What I know is people are going to accept the results on our side, whether they go our way or not, and that we are going to continue to amplify the message that we are a country of unity and we are a country that wants to move forward.
I'm just wondering, the thing that I look at after Tuesday is what I'm focused on because of the challenges of that. The many Trump supporters have already filed these lawsuits and what happened on January 6th in 2021. So is there messages that you can give people that are hardcore supporters on either side that just, where we stand?
Yeah,
as a nation?
look, I think the other thing, too, is Republicans have, I think, a few other sort of stopgaps in mind. I think the Senate's going to go Republican. I think the House may stay Republican, in which case, if you lose the presidency, you still have that voice down in Washington. We're not completely wiped out. I think that divided governments may move things slower, but it's certainly better than, it's a better step than just having no voice in Congress. So I think that's our fallback.
And Jaquetta, I keep hearing from progressives in my dog park, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I actually say, listen, if you support something, call the party, ask the phone bank, ask to go on the road, do something like that. What would your message be to Democrats and progressives if Donald Trump wins on Tuesday?
My life won't change Wednesday morning. I'll still get up and go to work. I'll still be able to pay my mortgage. I think the message that I want to send to people is start to focusing on those midterms and local elections, because what the Republican base did so well is they had a tantrum back in 2008 and they started to turn their base red. We need to start to turn the base back blue. That way we can have those elections that are fair and equal, and we can have our people in place.
All right, 30 seconds for each of you. If Trump wins or loses, what is the future of the Republican Republican Party? And same thing, if Harris wins or loses, what does the future of the Democratic Party look like?
Well, I think unlike what Biden and the Democrats did in hiding Kamala Harris for almost 4 years until the end, I think you're going to see J.D. Vance take a big prominent role going forward as probably the next standard bearer after the Trump presidency. And I think J.D. Vance has proven himself to be somebody who's got the heart and soul of the Republican Party.
What if they lose? What happens?
If they lose, like I said, I think with the House, Senate, we start to look at maybe leaders coming from there.
Jax, win or lose, what happens?
If she wins, I'm going to be partying and drinking all day on Wednesday.
Prosecco.
Prosecco, yes. And if she loses, I think what we need to do is just what I said, is continue to look at the midterm elections and local elections, municipal in particular, and start turning our base blue.
Thanks to both of you, Jaquetta Van Zandt, Jeff Deal.
Enjoy election night.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy it. It's going to be a long night. All right, still to come, where Americans find common ground on politics. Market research expert Diane Hessen has gathered some fascinating information on voters.
Up next, she shares what they're telling her about the issues that divide our leaders and what they're saying about the presidential candidates.
I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions.
That was just a part of Vice President Harris's closing argument last week. She made it at the Ellipse in the nation's capital near the White House.
Note the words the vice president used there. Quote, I pledge to seek common ground. It feels to me almost like a rare sentiment in Washington today. But what about the American people? Are we as divided as our leaders in Congress?
Someone who has been seeking and finding answers to those questions is Diane Hessen. She's a market research expert who, a few years ago, put together the emails of more than 500 voters across the country, people of diverse backgrounds, and started conversations with them, and she stayed in touch.
Those conversations are recounted and analyzed in her 2021 book, Our Common Ground, and Diane has stayed in touch with those folks in recent months as well. And Diane joins us now. Diane, great to see you.
Good to see you, too.
All right, so if you had to use a few words to describe how the various people that you stayed in contact with feel about America and the challenges that we face, what words would you choose? Would it be hopeful, scared, angry, all of the above?
Yeah. You know, it is interesting that you asked that question, Sue, because there really is a dichotomy. So when I ask voters specifically to describe for me the state of our country and its future, most Harris supporters use words like optimistic, hopeful, even excited. And most Trump supporters use words like concerned, pessimistic, alarmed. And it's interesting. I think that's also playing out in the messaging from the campaigns, in that Trump is saying that the country is a disaster, and Harris is saying there's a great future ahead of us, which kind of reinforces the mindsets of their base voters.
Diane, I want to know how you feel about a sentiment that we have heard for going back a decade now. The country is not as polarized as we think we are. Some might argue, yes, we are. And we've seen it in election after election. The folks that you talk to, do you get a sense that that statement is accurate, that we are not as divided as we think we are, and there is a lot of common ground there?
Well, Corey, look, I mean, I wouldn't have titled my book Our Common Ground if there weren't a massive number of issues where we do have that. So let me be clear here. The common ground is on policy. You know, you can get 3/4 of Americans to agree on the issues, not with the exact same views, but on compromise positions on almost all policy. So, for instance, take immigration. You know, over 3/4 of Americans would have been, probably more actually, maybe 80%, according to my data, would have been fine with that immigration bill from earlier this year that was blocked. You know, they agree with granting citizenship to a select group of dreamers. They agree with increasing security at the border, overhauling the assignment process to ensure clear and convincing proof of the need, you know, a trigger to shut down the border when a certain number of people have come through, and more. You know, there is common ground on that, on gun control, on infrastructure, healthcare. There is even some common ground on abortion. And the most common ground I found is about getting money out of politics, where virtually all but 10 of my 500 voters thought that was a great idea. You know, the problem is that we don't listen to each other, so it sounds unbelievable. and the extremes get the airtime. So we have very inaccurate perceptions of the other side.
All right, let's talk about the presidential race a little specifically. You mentioned how the Democrats' opinions changed or their words changed after Vice President Harris became the nominee this summer. But did you also find that their perceptions of her changed? Like, she was a senator, she was a vice president. No one really knew who she was except for those of us who pay attention to this. Did people's minds change the more they got to learn about her?
To some extent, I mean, look, how people feel depends on who you ask. So in the beginning, in general, Harris's supporters liked her because she wasn't Biden. And as time went on, they started talking about other characteristics, her great life story, her values, her smarts, her experience. Trump supporters have not really changed their views of Harris because they lump her into this, super liberal, super woke, high spending policies of the left. So that's been the messaging from them from the beginning. And undecided voters haven't really changed their view. I mean, they have two issues with Harris. One is they perceive that she's too progressive. And the other is they don't feel that she shared enough substance on policy. And I think that's less because they necessarily vote on policy and more because she seems evasive to them. So it's a trust issue. So shifts in the reason that her supporters really like her and support her, less shift on the other side.
All right, Diane, I know it's hard to believe with just a few days to go before the election, but yes, some people are still undecided about who they're going to vote for. The last time you spoke to your folks, are there any undecided voters in that group? And after you answer that question, can you talk to us about the gender gap that we have seen in the early vote? What does that look like amongst your group? Is it the same sort of gender gap that we're seeing thus far with some of the polling and the results?
Sure. I've got of my 500 voters, I probably have about 30 left who are still undecided. And let me be clear here. What that means is they don't like either candidate. That's their struggle. It's not, oh, there are pluses and minuses here. Oh, there are pluses and minuses here. They literally cannot see themselves walking into the voting booth and flipping a switch for one of these people, and that's their struggle. One interesting dynamic, Corey, is the issue of what state you're in. So, for instance, here in Massachusetts, people are much more likely to vote for a third-party candidate because they know Massachusetts is going to go for Harris. So they figure if they vote for Harris or for Trump, their vote might not matter a lot. But if they can, get a lot of their buddies to vote for RFK, they will have an opportunity to make a statement. So that's what you see, making a statement going on in states that are not swing states, which obviously is not going on in the others. In terms of the gender gap, pretty much the same dynamic as in the polls, with women more likely to support Harris, men more likely to support Trump. I think what's important for our viewers to remember, though, is this is not 80% of the women wanting Harris and 20% wanting Trump. The last poll I saw was they were breaking 55% for Harris and 43% for Trump. And kind of the opposite in terms of men. So there are, for instance, millions of American women who support Trump, and their biggest issues are related to the economy and immigration and, in their words, the lack of fairness with how our country spends money and therefore how their tax dollars get spent.
All right, Diane Hessen, thank you so much for joining us on At Issue. We certainly appreciate the time.
Good to see you.
So Vice President Kamala Harris took a little detour from campaigning last night.
Check out where she ended up.
Gosh, I wish I could talk to someone who's been in my shoes, a black South Asian woman running for president, preferably from the Bay Area.
That was Kamala Harris on Saturday Night Live having fun with her doppelganger, Maya Rudolph. It's a long SNL tradition to have presidential hopefuls on the program. Sarah Palin, Barack Obama, John McCain all appeared. Former President Trump even hosted the show in November of 2015. We don't know whether he was invited this cycle. Yeah, who knows? All right, so Sue, Matt, and I are all back tomorrow night at 7:30 for another live edition of At Issue. We're going to speak to college voters on what they heard from the candidates.
And, of course, We're going to be live for election night coverage and results from Massachusetts and across the country. It all starts at 7 on NBC 10 Boston.
For Sue O'Connell, Matt Pritchard, I'm Corey Smith. Enjoy your Sunday.